Normally when I do these trick tip videos, I try to be as definitive as possible. I try and find the best way of doing a trick before I teach anyone else. And it comes from judo, actually. My old sensei used to talk to me all the time about pure technique. The importance of finding the most natural and fluid way of throwing someone to the ground. Because you can do the same throw 6 billion different ways, you know, different hand grips, different twists, different motions, but he was a firm believer that if you found the most fluid and natural way of going through that motion, then you don't have to rely on strength. You don't have to rely on power. And it should become quite easy. And the same thing applies to freestyle. Now, I'm saying this all here because the rail whip can be done so many different ways. Not just from heel side or toe side or with your front foot or your back foot, but there are so many subtle variations. What I'm going to try and teach you now is not a pure technique, but it is, in my opinion, the easiest way of doing this trick. And it is very setup dependent, and you might have to adjust this slightly based on whatever your setup is. I'll talk about that a bit later on. So watch this video, try and learn the trick, but then also watch other people who do a lot of rail whips. Thinking of like Anthony Sim and Denham Hill, Alex Foster started doing them. Going back further, there was a guy called Callum Bowen, also in Britain, who was very good at them. Look at how they've changed this technique slightly to suit them and their setups, because that's something you might have to consider for yourself. So I'm not actually going to be using my pro model for this video. I can do rail whips on a Tony Gale board, but the way I tend to set up my boards is not exactly optimal for the rail whips. I have my trucks a little bit loose to prioritize rolling tricks, and I tend to use softer wheels for grip, which is not ideal when you're trying to spin the board around on its side. On the other hand, the Kill Your Idols board that I've just set up still has 101A roller bones, which will spin perfectly on this trick. The slightly different shape at the front end also makes a big difference. While the Kill Your Idols doesn't taper the whole way along the rail like the Rodney Mullen board does, it still tapers towards the nose slightly earlier than a Tony Gale board. As a result, it has a bit less friction and will kick into the spin a lot easier. It also gives me a bit more room for my feet as it goes around. One last point on setups, and I say this every time I do a video involving a rail trick, but please buy freestyle wheels. You're not going to be able to do this trick properly unless your wheels cover the axle nut. If your axle nut is dragging across the floor, it's going to jolt, it's going to throw you off. You're making this way harder for yourself. Just buy some freestyle wheels. This trick starts in heel side rail, but we need to change our foot position slightly. If you try it from a regular rail position, all that's going to happen is the board's going to get stuck. So to make this easier on yourself, bring your front foot further back so that just the toes, they're just overhanging the wheel slightly. And then lift the heel so that you can move that foot freely without it touching the board at all. That's your starting position for the rail whip. Notice, however, that I'm doing it around my front foot, but if you're a Mongo pusher, you might find it easier going around the back foot because that's the one you're more used to standing on. Either is fine. There are no hard and set rules on this. Here's what that foot position looks from the side. You can see that when I lift my heel, I've got completely free movement and my toes are barely hanging over. Having a taller setup, taller trucks, risers, and larger diameter wheels will help with this trick. It gives you much more room to move. Now you can spin a rail whip in either direction from either stance. So if you wanted to kick it behind you, once that front foot's in position, all you've got to do is flick this back foot around and let it go. But for me, the easiest way to do a rail whip, particularly for beginners, is to kick it forwards. What you want to do is take your back foot off and point it down towards the ground, so the top of the foot is connecting with the grip tape. This is important because if you just toe punt it like that, you're more likely to kick the board straight in front of you and probably flip it. By using the top, you've got much more control. Also, don't kick straight out. You want to try and kick diagonally that way. That way you'll sweep the board into a rotation rather than just flip it away from you. So once your back foot knows what it's doing and your front foot's in place, just give it a nudge and see what happens. To illustrate why that back foot is so important, I'm now purposely going to do this wrong. I'm going to have my front foot in exactly the right place, but I'm going to keep my back foot flat to the ground and kick straight forward. So I'm basically toe punting the board. This is going to happen pretty much every time you do that. Not only did that really hurt my toes, and it was incredibly stupid, but as you can see, the board jumped off in front of me. It also fell down back to the wheels. If you don't connect with the top and kick across that way, you're always going to end up losing the board. It's really, really hard to keep it under you if you've got a forward motion. Better go fetch that. When I did a video for the Railwhip back, which is this thing, I talked a little bit about unweighting yourself. The fact you can press downwards and straighten your legs to temporarily take a little bit of weight off your board. Now, you have to do that, but much less pronounced with an actual full Railwhip, because you've got to balance on just one leg. Everything has to stay centered over that position. But if your weight is flat, if you're flat-footed on it, you're going to struggle to let the board go freely around your foot. So don't try and jump, don't launch yourself in the air, but it helps if you flex your knees slightly just before you begin, and then straighten up to take your weight off it a little bit and let the board whip around beneath you. When you're learning this trick, there are a couple of hurdles you're going to come across, a couple of problems you're guaranteed to have, and they all involve the front foot. The first one is actually really obvious, and it involves not getting the front foot in the correct position, as I showed you earlier. If your toes are overhanging too much, then as you lift the heel to get the board free enough to move, you're dipping your toes and you're putting them right in the line of travel for the board. So this happens. It just stops dead when it hits the toes. Now, having a taller board, larger diameter wheels, bigger trucks, risers, as I mentioned earlier, gives you a lot more room to play with, and it reduces the chance of that happening. But you still need to make sure your foot is in the right position. The second problem is much less obvious. It involves how to stop the trick, how to catch it, if you will. Because when I started learning this, I thought people caught it with their back foot. That's not the case. What actually happens is, because you're lifting the heel up to make the board free enough to move, it's the dropping of the heel that will catch the board at just the right time and stop it. So, let's see if this will work. See? Didn't use the back foot at all. All I did was lower the heel back down at the right time to catch it. But if you do that too early because you've not got enough balance, or you're leaning too far back, or you've not gone weightless enough, then what happens is the board will hit the side of the heel and stop dead. Like that. Now, that's pretty catastrophic. There's no recovery from that. So you've got to avoid that one. But this is where it gets fun. If you don't bring the heel down early enough, then the opposite happens, and the board will keep spinning. It will over-rotate. Now, I do this by accident sometimes. I'm not sure I can do it on command, but let's give it a go. There you go. It went slightly further than planned. But as you can see, I can just bring this foot out, catch it, and pull it back. It's not that big of a deal if you do over-rotate. It doesn't look clean. That is not the goal. But if you're doing that consistently, it is way better than the alternative. Falling short is just going to be a disaster every time. Just in case there's any doubt about which part of the foot you should be using to do these rail whips, neither of these holes were here when I left the house today. That is your rail flip sweet spot. Oh wow, I can actually see my sock now. Jesus, better patch these up when I get back home.